Hello, welcome to the TechHub.training challenge solution for SQL Precision Plain Aggregation Adventure. This challenge was created in conjunction with the SQL Learning Path and focuses on the use of the having statement in SQL to filter aggregated data. We'll be using the same Precision Plain dataset that we've used throughout the learning path to answer a few questions for the CFO to help them prepare to present some important information to the shareholders of Precision Plain parts. The CFO is mostly concerned about managing costs and managing costs and efficiency of the workforce, and as such, the queries that we're going to answer today are going to directly answer the questions that he has. All right, first step is to go ahead and open up the data that you've downloaded. Again, we can ignore this little warning, and let's first go ahead and just review the relationships. So on the challenge page, you should have a picture of these tables. I would encourage you to reference these throughout your queries because we will be doing a lot of joining and a lot of grabbing column names, and these relationships are a great reminder as to how these tables talk to each other. And as you're figuring out which tables to join, this is going to be your key to be able to see exactly how these tables are connected. So, for example, the orders table has a vendor ID number here. So how do we know the name of that vendor? Well, we have to connect it to the vendor table, and that vendor ID here is going to be able to tell us what that company name is. So that's very important. These relationships are all over the place. So we'll be using these relationships to answer some of these questions that the CFO has. So without further ado, let's go ahead and click Close and jump into creating our first query. So our first question: which of our preferred vendors from whom we purchase inventory has the lowest average inventory price? Only present the vendors with the average purchase price below $75 and limit the report to only 2 columns. So what's important about SQL is we need to be able to learn how to narrow down the focus of our report, because SQL, you can pull a ton of different information, but we want to focus on exactly what the CFO wants to know. So how are we going to do this? Well, first we need to figure out who our preferred vendors are that we purchase inventory from. So we know we're going to want to use the vendor table, and we know we're going to want to use the inventory table because these are the vendor we purchase from is from the vendor table right here, and then the inventory table has this information, which is useful. So first we want to be able to select the company name from the vendor table, and then we also want to select the expected purchase price from the inventory table. So what is this saying? It's saying when we order the leading edge, we would expect for that to cost us $10,000. That's the expected purchase price. Now, pay attention to what the CFO is asking. He's asking for the lowest average inventory price. So thus, instead of just pulling just the price, we need to get an average of all the prices of the inventory item for each company. And then we need to rename it, which, as we know, we just use the as statement to do that. So let's go ahead and rename that to average purchase price, like so. And then we can work on our from. So we know we're going to want to join the inventory and the vendor table together. So basically, this is some review on the join the learning path and how joins work. We can see that this preferred vendor ID can match up to the vendor ID in the vendor table. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to say from the inventory table, we're going to go ahead and cast it to an alias. So we'll just say as I, and then we'll do an inner join because we want to keep the records from both. Vendor as V, and then we can do I.preferred vendor, because that's what the column is called, equals V.vendor ID, because that's what this one's called. So since we're joining together tables and aliasing, we should actually go back, and it's good form to make sure these are referencing the correct tables. So I'll go ahead and say v.company name and i.exp purchase price. All right, and because we have an aggregation in the select statement, we know we're going to need a group by. Anytime you're averaging, you need a group by. So we'll go ahead and group by the non-aggregated field, so in this case, the company name. And then we need to filter the aggregation, and this is where the having statement comes in. The having statement is what enables us to filter on just the aggregation. If you recall, the where statement is what lets us filter on any non-aggregations. So if we wanted to limit which company names are visible, we would use a where statement. But because we want to limit the averages, we need to use a having statement. What's also important about the having statement is you cannot reference an alias here. So if you want to say with an average purchase price less than 75, you're going to run into an error like so, because it has no idea what average purchase price is. The reason for this is because SQL actually reads the select statement last when it runs a query. It goes from statement down and then it reads the select statement last. So it has no idea what this is because it hasn't read this yet. So we have to instead use the actual thing in the select statement. So in this case, we have to call the average again, like so. And then this is just saying where the averages are less than 75. And then lastly, because we want to present a clean report to our superior, to the CFO, we can order by that average descending. So we can just do the same exact thing here where we copy, like so, and run. And then we can see that we have our company names and the average purchase price of the inventory we purchased from them. So what is this saying? Anytime we buy inventory from Jetstream Components, we are paying on average $60 per unit of inventory. So we probably might want to keep that down. That could be why the CFO is asking. I will make one additional note on this order by here. Instead of, if you don't want to type this all out again, you can simply put the number of the column as well. So in this case, company name is the first column, average is the second column. So if you just say order by 2, it'll just order by the second column descending. It'll get us the same thing. Let's go ahead and save our query. So in this case, this is going to be preferred inventory average purchase. Click OK. All right. Now that showcases the basics of the having statement. So let's go ahead and move on with query 2. So we'll go ahead and create a new query. This query asks us how many employees we currently have in each role in the accounts payable department. We only want to include roles that have at least 3 employees in them. The report should be in the order of employee count with 2 columns, employee role description and employee count. So we know we're going to want to use the employee role table because we want to get that role description. And we want to figure out how many employees are in each role. If you want to go and look in the relationships, you can see that this ties directly to the employee table. So these are the 2 tables we're going to need to join together. So from here on out, I'm not going to focus a ton on this relationships. My understanding is that you know how to come to this relationships to figure out how these tables connect from here on out. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into writing the query. So we know we're going to want the emp role description, and that's going to come from the employee role table. So again, I'm going to go ahead and alias in advance. And then we want to get, this time, a count of the employee ID from the employee table this time. And then we also are going to want to rename it to employee count. So we're going to use the as, and then employee count. And then we're going to do our joins. So we know we're going to want to get the employee table. And we're going to alias that as E. That's what I've done up here. And then we're going to join that to the employee role table. And then we're going to call that ER. And then what are we going to join on? Well, let's look. The employee table has an employee role ID. So perfect. So we want to do e.employee role ID like this. And this one's actually called emp role ID in the employee role table. So a little bit different. Make sure that doesn't trip you up. So then this one's going to be er.emp role ID. So SQL, you can't just automatically assume these are always going to be the same. They might not be. All right. Do we have to filter on any non-aggregations? We do not. we only need to filter on aggregations. So first we need to address the group by. So we're going to group by our non-aggregated field, which is the emp role description. And then, using the same logic as before, we're going to use the having statement. And what does the CFO want? He wants only the roles that have at least 3 people in them. So we can simply say greater than 2. We could also say greater than or equal to 3. Either of those would work. For the purposes of the query, I'll go ahead and do greater than 2. And in this case, the order needs to be by employee count. So in this case, it's just assumed it's an ascending count. So we'll go ahead and say order by 2, because we can just say order by that second column. We'll go ahead and run, and we can see that we have the emp role description here along with the employee count. You can see none of these are below 3. These are all above 3, so we know our having statement is functioning correctly. So we'll go ahead and save this as query 2. Let's call this emp role counts. And then we can move on with the next query. Go ahead and close out of these tables. And then let's look at what the CFO wants from us next. So this time he's asking, which vendors sent us the most invoices in the first quarter of 2023? Alarm bells should be going off in your head. We have to limit the invoices to that first quarter of 2023. He's only concerned from an efficiency perspective if a vendor is invoicing us more than 10 times in a single quarter. So again, another filtering, if they're invoicing more than 10 times, that's bad. Those are what he cares about. That's an aggregation, right? How much times each vendor is invoicing, that's a count. This report should also only have 2 columns, company name and total invoices. All right, so what tables do we think we're going to need? So he's asking about vendors, so we probably know we're going to need the vendor table. And then he's also asking about invoices, so we know we're probably going to want to use the invoice table. Now remember, you can always go to the database tools relationships to see how vendor and invoice are connected. In this case, you can see this here. I won't spend a ton of time on that. And let's go ahead and jump into writing the query. So first, let's start with the select statement. We're just going to do select the company name. And we know this is going to come from the vendor table, so I'll go ahead and alias that as a V. And then we're also going to want another count. And then this time, we're wanting to know how many times they're invoicing us. So the primary key is usually what I go to. If we want to count the number of invoices, we want to count the primary key. So this is what we're going to count, the invoice ID. And we'll call this I.invoice ID. And then we'll rename this to be total invoices. All right, and now we're going to need to join those 2 tables together, the invoice table and the vendor table. So in this case, we're going to do we'll just start at the vendor table. So vendor as V and inner joining to the invoice table as I, and then we're going to join on the vendor ID because that's what's present in both tables. If we wanted to double check, we can see vendor ID is our primary key here. Vendor ID is our foreign key here. Great. All right, next, do we have any non-aggregations that we need to filter on? Yes, we do. This time we need to make sure the invoice dates are in the month or the year of 2023 and in the first quarter. So how do we do that? We use the where statement. You remember from earlier in the learning path when we talked about the where statement and the various things the where statement can do. One of them is it can help us limit dates. So the challenge says that we should focus on the invoice date here. So we want to focus on the invoice date. So I'm just double checking that it's the invoice date. So I think it's actually the invoice receipt date. Let's go ahead and focus on the invoice receipt date. Lots of dates here. That's why we clarify in the challenge that we are concerned on when we actually receive it. So the receipt date is when we received it in the office. So we can use what are known in Access as date functions. So we can say where month, and then we can call the invoice receipt date. Note that I'm calling it I dot because we're referencing the invoice table, invoice receipt date. And because we want the first quarter, we can say where this is less than 4. And then we'll do an and then this time we'll just say the year, and then we'll also do the invoice receipt date. And then this one you can say equals 2023, because we're concerned about the first quarter of 2023. All right, that's our where statement. Now we need to group by. We know we need to group by because of the aggregation up top. So we group by the non-aggregated fields. And then, do we have an aggregation? We do. And do we need to filter on it? We do. Probably a giveaway based on the focus of this challenge. In this case, we know the CFO is only concerned if the vendor is invoicing us more than 10 times in a single quarter. So in other words, if this count is more than 10, he's concerned. So we need to do the having, and then we can just say count invoice ID greater than 10. And then we're also going to be doing an order by on this one. So we're just going to say order by to descending. That's kind of the theme here. All right, so look at all these vendors that are invoicing us more than 10 times a month. The CFO is probably going to evaluate if we can combine some of those invoices together and reduce our processing time, make us more efficient. All right, so that's our query 3. So let's go ahead and save that. And we'll just say total invoices by vendor. And then we can click OK. You can see it saved to the side. And now we can move on to what I call the final boss of the challenge, query 4. Which vendors have we spent the most money on purchase orders for on inventory that we typically order monthly? Give me the total amount of money we've committed to each vendor this year. I only care about vendors where our total amount exceeds $100,000. This report should only have 2 columns, company name and order total. What makes this one hard is honestly, how do we join the tables together and get what we need? Because we need to get our order total, we need to get our order total, we need to get our inventory, because we need to get that inventory table to specify on the monthly items only, and then we also need to get the vendor table in there because it's concerned about the vendors. It's a lot of stuff. So let's look at the relationships. So we know we're going to need the vendor table. The order detail table is the only way we can get an order in. We know we're going to need the orders table because that's the only way that we can actually connect order detail to the vendor. And then we know we're also going to need the inventory table. So we need all 4 of these tables to make this query work. So let's go ahead and create our query and go ahead and start designing the select statement. So first part's easy. So we're going to select the company name from the vendor table, right? That's very consistent across most of these queries where we want to know the company name on the vendor in question. And then next, we need to get that order total. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. Let's look at the order detail to maybe get a visual understanding of how to do this. So we know that there's this order ID and this inventory ID. How much did they order? 88 at $8.17 a piece. So to get the order total, we need to actually multiply these two together. The 88 times the 817, that'll get us our order total. So let's go ahead and multiply those two together. So we'll do OD for order detail times, or that's not times yet, we need to call quantity ordered, times OD dot price per unit. And again, you're welcome to reference your tables to figure out what those columns are called and how to spell them. Very important in SQL that we're getting this right. And then in order for us to get an aggregation of this, a total amongst all vendors, we need to sum that total together. It's kind of tough to understand, but the reason is multiple orders can be placed with the same vendor over time. And if we're placing multiple orders, we want to be able to just sum the total of all these order prices together. So we've got a sum, and then we'll call this order total. The challenge instructions also say that you should round this to 2 decimal places. This is just good form because anytime you're dealing with money, you want to be able to present it in a way that's clear and readable. So how do we do that in Access? We can go here and just call the round function, and then we can just put this in 2 decimal places apiece. So we can just do comma 2, And that's the easiest way that we can round it to 2 decimal places. And then we can keep that order total the same. And then there's our from statement. So now we need to know exactly how to join the tables together. What I would highly recommend is to look at that relationship diagram, so this one here, and pay careful attention on what these things are connecting on in preparation for you to join. I don't want to take a ton of time on this challenge on how you would join them together, but here's the logic that I would go through. So I know that I'm going to want order detail table as OD, because that's what I'm referencing up here. And then we're going to want to join it to the inventory table, because remember, inventory ID here, that connects us to this table where we need access to this expenditure frequency. And then we can call that I, and then we can connect it through the inventory IDs. And then we know we need to join it to another table. In Access, you have to put this full first table in parentheses before you join. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to put these in parentheses, and then we're going to do another inner join, this time to the orders table, as O on OD.orderID equals O.orderID, right? Because this order ID will tie out to this order ID in the orders table. So now I have access to all of this information. Why do we need access to this information? Because of the vendor ID column. We need to know that company name. So now we need to also join the vendor table, which means we need to put parentheses around this entire table first. So let's go ahead and do that. Parentheses here, parentheses here. Then we can just all go on a separate line to make sure we have enough space. Inner join vendor as V, and this time O.vendor_ID equals V.vendor_ID, because the orders table, if you remember, is the one that has the order ID column, or sorry, the vendor ID column. And so that's how we're going to connect those two together. And that's our from. Now we have all 4 tables joined together, ready for us to get the information we need. So now the where statement is next. Do we need a where statement? Do we have an aggregation, a non-aggregated field that we need to filter on? The answer is yes. Remember from the question, the CFO is concerned about inventory that we order monthly. So going back to query 1, we're just going to use that same column from the inventory table. So we'll do I dot standard expenditure frequency equals monthly. Anytime you're going to reference a string field, you need to put it in quotes. So I'll go ahead and put this one in quotations. Great. So now that's filtering out all inventory items that are not ordered monthly. Or in other words, it'll only consider inventory that is ordered monthly. All right. Group by. We have an aggregation because this is a sum. That's an aggregation, so we need to group by the company name. And then finally, do you remember the CFO's materiality threshold, what he cares about? He only cares about orders that total over $100,000. So we need to have a halving. Remember, anytime we're referencing a field that's aggregated, you have to have a halving statement to be able to filter on that. So, and again, we can't say order total here, no matter how much you want to. So all you need to do is just copy this aggregated field here. Notice I'm not including the round because we actually don't need the rounding in the halving statement. That's just a formatting thing for the select statement. We can say having this field greater than 100,000. And again, just pure numbers is perfectly fine. And let's order our results by that order total descending. And if we don't want to worry about typing this whole thing out again, we can use our 2. So let's go ahead and run and see what our query looks like. Wow, look at this. Skyline Aero Parts, we order a lot of stuff from them. So maybe the CFO is concerned we're ordering a little too much from them. You get what I'm saying? Maybe we need to get things from a different company. Maybe different companies might offer a better price. It's just something that we should look into, potentially to save us some money. Now, before we lose all of our hard work, let's go ahead and save our query. And let's just say this as high order totals. We'll say high monthly inventory totals. What's nice about making queries like this is if you wanted to do one that focused on weekly instead of monthly, all you'd have to do is just go into the SQL view and then copy this, start a new query, and then paste, and you could just change your where to weekly, run it, and it would show you something else. So I guess we don't have a lot of really high weekly inventory totals. So it's just really nice to be able to have our queries saved. And also, if our database gets updated and changed, and we have our queries saved to the side, we can just run them over time, and we always have that available to us. And this gets us what we need. All right. I hope you were able to learn a lot more about the halving statement and what the purpose of the halving statement is, as well as to be able to refresh a little bit on the other basic parts of SQL. You need to know everything about the select, from, where, group by, halving, or order by statements, as well as the halving statements. These 6 statements make up the basics in the beginning knowledge of SQL. With this knowledge, you are now fully equipped to jump into any of the beginner challenges on TechHub, as well as just being able to answer any other basic SQL questions without having to do a ton of extra work. We hope you'll continue to learn on the TechHub platform. We hope this video has been valuable to you, as you've been able to learn more about SQL, and that you can use this when you go into the real world in your future ventures. Thank you.